Even if money doesn't solve everything, it at least helps with many problems. But it certainly doesn't make bad people good. The protagonist of today's story was a rich man, but a very bad one, which unfortunately only worked to his advantage. The small town of Brentwood was about a 20-minute drive from Nashville. This place is known for its natural beauty and ranks among the 20 wealthiest and most prestigious places in the United States, with a population of about 40,000. The town is considered one of the safest. Since its founding in 1969, only 8 murders have occurred there. In fact, this city is regarded as one of the safest places in the country. It boasts luxurious parks, numerous restaurants, and clubs for affluent guests. Additionally, many headquarters of large manufacturing companies, including international organizations, are located here. Despite this track record, even in such paradisiacal places, real nightmares can occur. The house of Rachel and Randolph Maidens was located in a guarded country club on a hill. The estate covered a total of 600 hectares and featured an award-winning private golf course known as the No. 1 Governor's Club. The club was one of the wealthiest and most prestigious neighborhoods in the city. The couple's villa was 5,000 square meters in size and cost a fortune. It seemed like a real fortress where one could start a family and run a business. Rachel Elizabeth Maidens was a 34-year-old orthodontist who had her private practice in the city's business district. She was a very beautiful woman, naturally blonde, and a devoted mother to her daughter Natalie. Rachel attended a Catholic private school in Nashville and then went to a college in South Birmingham, followed by a dental school in Florida. Throughout her education, Rachel received numerous awards. The successful beauty also showed achievements in tennis. Her accomplishments included a prestigious scholarship. The crowning achievement of her academic success was completing her specialist training at the Children's National Medical Center in Washington, D.C. Despite her young age, the woman had a brilliant career. Thanks to her successes, she managed to open her own practice. She began publishing articles in professional journals and regularly gave lectures at conferences. However, not everything in her life was so successful. While still studying, on December 3, 2003, her father Richard was arrested for selling oxycodone. The man was a respected pharmacist but was involved in the trade of prescription drugs. Although law enforcement had just begun investigating his case, he was so afraid of losing his reputation that he took his own life just 2 days after his arrest. The family's nightmares didn't stop there, as the police continued to investigate all family members. The bank accounts of Rachel, her mother, and her brother were seized. The investigations dragged on for several years. Rachel's mother was fined $15,000, marking the end of the dark phase in their lives. Many close friends and family members claimed that all this caused great harm to her emotional state. However, this didn't stop her from pursuing professional success. She endured all these difficulties steadfastly and continued to develop her own activities. The woman still wanted to be the best in her profession, striving for wealth and independence. She managed to overcome the family's financial crisis and the terrible loss of a loved one, subsequently rehabilitating herself. Rachel took her life back into her own hands. Her husband Randy, as he was known in his close circle, grew up in Georgia. After high school, he attended the Georgia Tech College of Technology. Gradually, he became a well-paid pharmaceutical sales manager. But by the time of the tragic events, all of this had collapsed, and Randy was unemployed. Only 3 months before the described events, a noticeable change in his behavior had occurred, causing many problems. Rachel reported that he quickly descended into uncontrolled alcoholism. There was also suspicion that he was simultaneously consuming various medications, which exacerbated the harmful effects. During this time, several witnesses observed him entering a restaurant heavily intoxicated and harassing customers and staff. One of the employees felt compelled to call the emergency number 911. The young woman who made the emergency call identified the man as Randy Maidens, as he had dined here several times with his wife. A few minutes after the first call, She called emergency services again because she was even more worried. She said that some suspicious items had accidentally fallen out of the man's bag, including a shotgun and a suspiciously large bottle that looked like the painkiller Tylenol. The boorish guest gathered everything and then tried to leave the establishment. The waitress managed to persuade him to stay. The patrol officers who arrived at the scene immediately noticed that the man was behaving inappropriately, but couldn't say for sure whether he was drunk or under the influence of something stronger. Randy became anxious. He wanted to leave under the pretext that his wife had called him and asked him to come home. The waitress offered to contact his wife, but he refused to provide her phone number. The man tried to get into his vehicle, but the police officers didn't allow it. During the search of his car, another shotgun was found on the back seat. Despite these oddities, the man was not arrested. Several witnesses saw him being picked up by someone in a car that evening, someone who would never allow him to drive while intoxicated. When Randy was in such situations, he always asked that no one call his wife. The man complained that he was often the victim of her anger and was afraid of upsetting her. Considering his inappropriate behavior, this reaction seemed quite natural. On the evening of April 21, 2013, Rachel's mother Betty called the Brentwood Police Department and asked the officers to check her daughter's property. The woman immediately said that Randy was on the verge of taking his own life. She was worried because she couldn't speak with Rachel. Betty had tried calling her daughter for a long time, but the phone was answered by her husband, who refused to hand the phone to his wife. Finally, the woman lost her composure and threatened to call the police, which didn't work, so she had to keep her promise. The officers arrived at the house within minutes and immediately noticed that the curtains were drawn throughout the house. Since no one responded to knocking on the door, there was no way to see what was happening inside. Fortunately, the garage door was open. The police officers could enter the house and called out the residents by name. Neither Randy nor Rachel were in the house. Suddenly, a child responded to their calls. A 2-year-old girl named Natalie was on the first floor and was crying. The child refused to say what had happened and kept repeating the same sentence through tears. "Daddy is gone. Daddy is gone." During the inspection on the first floor, one of the officers stepped into the large hallway. Leaning over the balcony railing, he saw a blood-splattered wall and a shotgun lying on a couch on the ground floor. Rachel was found in the corridor between the living room and the hallway leading to the master bedroom. She showed no signs of life. She had been shot like at a shooting gallery, 8 shots from a 9mm pistol and 2 shotgun shells in the back. The victim was wrapped in a blanket. The investigation made it clear that someone had tried to wipe the blood from the walls, and visible stains were left on the floor. Naturally, the husband of the murdered victim, Randy Maidens, was immediately put on the wanted list. Helicopters and SWAT teams were deployed to prevent the suspect from escaping. The upscale residential area looked like a Hollywood blockbuster. The police officers actively worked with the victim's neighbors, trying to find out where the man might have gone. When the victim's mother heard the shocking news, she immediately came to pick up her grandchild. Her son-in-law was considered particularly dangerous due to his inappropriate behavior lately. It was expected that he would remain armed, which is why a warning was issued. Neighbors of the family confirmed that they had seen the fugitive on numerous occasions in an inappropriate state. On the kitchen table in the deceased's villa, a note was found. In it, Randy apologized profusely to his daughter and confessed that he loved her very much. He wrote that he was forced to flee because of his terrible deed, but didn't say what he had done. The man thanked all his wife's relatives for the years they had given him. Randy confessed that he could no longer endure the humiliations he experienced daily from his wife. He wrote that since the beginning of their relationship, she had morally executed him every night and treated him like dirt. After 7 years, he simply lost patience. On that fateful evening, his wife had started to harass him in the same way, and that was the last straw. The loving father wanted to take care of his daughter Natalie and apologized several times to the child because he couldn't take it anymore and gave up. He also emphasized that he didn't want the girl to stay with her mother and asked that custody be transferred to his wife's relatives on Rachel's side of the family. When the experts familiarized themselves with the content of the letter, the main suspect was still on the run. According to some experts, his letter could be interpreted not only as a confession, but also as a farewell note. This made the search efforts even more complicated and indicated that the man might already be deceased. Strangely, a car belonging to the man was parked in the driveway of the property. Inside, they found $7,000 in cash in a large bag in the trunk. Another approximately $3,000 in cash was found in the house. By checking phone records, the officers could determine that Randy had called his lawyer on the evening of the murder. Apparently, the man's original plan was to kill his wife and then take off with the money to start a new life. But then something went wrong, and he wrote the letter. Perhaps it was just staged to cover his tracks. But then why didn't he take his car? What could have prevented him? Especially since he still had enough time. Law enforcement suspected that it might have had something to do with Betty's calls. The woman called the police, which could have thwarted the criminal's plans. To the police's surprise, the search was of short duration. 12 hours after the search for the murderer began, Randy simply came out of the woods behind his house with his hands up. The man surrendered to the authorities without offering resistance. He immediately accused his wife of psychologically harassing him for years. The pressure had become particularly intense when he lost his job. Because of this behavior of his beloved wife, he had practically slipped into a life on the edge of society. In his defense, Randy said that he was Rachel's third husband, as the others couldn't endure her constant nagging either. However, this in no way justified 10 cowardly shots into his wife's back. The criminal had hardly had time to process the consequences of his prank at the restaurant 3 months earlier, and now there was also a charge of murdering his wife. It has become known that he had recently come into conflict with the law several times for minor offenses. Specifically, he was stopped in his car a few months before his wife's death when he was drunk. Due to the strong smell of alcohol, the police officer was sure that Randy was drunk, but the man refused to take a test. By law, this was equivalent to drunk driving. Later, he was involved in an accident with his car for exactly the same reason. He was so drunk that he crashed into a power station and darkened almost 200 houses for several hours. A few weeks before Rachel's murder, a neighbor saw a stranger with a ski mask and 2 dogs running through the woods. It was the same place from which Randy later emerged when he surrendered to the authorities. A neighbor spoke to the stranger and recognized Randy. She approached him to find out what was going on and immediately realized that the man was heavily intoxicated or under the influence of some substance. The neighbor said he had been walking his dogs and got lost, so he walked toward her property. According to the woman, at that time he had something like a bow and arrows in his backpack, so she hurried to get away. Later, he was seen many more times engaging in similar activities, which unsettled the residents of the houses near the Maidens' residence. They feared for their safety. At the end of March, proceedings for trespassing were initiated against Randy in Florida, but he got away unscathed. The investigations were simply covered up. He was probably saved by money. The most disturbing incident occurred in January 2013 during a work conference in Orlando that he attended with his wife. One evening, he visited a bar and got so drunk that he was no longer able to speak coherently. The establishment staff asked him to leave the premises, but the man began smashing dishes and cursing. Several people heard him simultaneously threaten to kill his wife, but no one took these drunken threats seriously. Several guests tried to intervene to escort the rioting guest out of the bar, but Randy started fighting, so the police had to be called again. He was eventually arrested for disorderly conduct and consuming alcohol in public, but he was released the next day. His employer learned of the incident. The pharmaceutical company was concerned about its reputation, and Randy's inappropriate behavior was taken very seriously. One of his colleagues, who wished to remain anonymous, advised the man to take a temporary leave for health reasons. However, he didn't listen and returned to his workplace 3 days later. Consequently, he was fired, During the investigations, the police conducted numerous interviews with the murderer's colleagues, all of which were under strict confidentiality. The organization's management threatened to dismiss anyone who openly discussed the incidents with their alcoholic employee. According to these individuals, the perpetrator's behavior had drastically changed in the months before the incident with his wife. At the same time, he himself didn't explain what might be related to this, but always complained about his wife and blamed her for everything. Although everyone around him couldn't believe that his wife could push him so hard, Rachel always seemed nice, calm, and reasonable. It was hard to believe. But even if the woman scolded him at home, that's no excuse for behaving unrestrainedly in public places and posing a danger to strangers. It turned out that Randy's ex-girlfriend, Larissa Farley, was trying to contact him at the time of the abuse. They had been together in high school, but their romance didn't work out, and fate separated their paths. Larissa got married, divorced, and now remembered Randy, determined to meet him again and give it another try in adulthood. She learned about Randy's marital problems and assumed that the whole thing would end in divorce. In fact, she was shocked by the recent events in Randy's life and thought she could help him get his life back on track. Larissa had known him for over a decade. They had been friends for a long time. The woman claimed that there was not a single episode in Randy's biography that could be considered a prerequisite for violent retaliation. She knew him as a mature and intelligent man who valued his family and loved his child. At the same time, she also knew the other side of him. According to her, he had lived for a long time with an alcoholic father who treated him poorly. As he got older, he had a very strained relationship with his mother, which was one of the reasons why he didn't want his daughter Natalie to be placed in the care of his own family members. Larissa suspected that his problems and difficult childhood might have broken him and that the man needed help. Employees of the company from which the murderer was dismissed claimed they knew about his problems with illegal substances. According to colleagues and even the management, he had admitted long before the incident to struggling with his addiction. Nevertheless, it was believed that he had overcome these problems and their consequences in the years before the attack. But then he relapsed. What was the real reason for this man's misconduct that led to the murder of his wife? Immediately after his arrest, the 42-year-old Randy was charged with first-degree murder. He also endangered the life of a child, which was the second charge. Additionally, the man was found guilty of tampering with evidence, as he had tried to dispose of bloodstains and the blanket in which the victim was wrapped. The investigators were sure that he intended to eliminate the evidence of the crime and then flee, presumably to Mexico, with the money he had prepared. The bail was initially set at $2.5 million. He sat behind bars and awaited his trial. At the end of June 2013, the man had still not pleaded guilty to all charges. His lawyer was one of Nashville's best defense attorneys, named David Rabin. He sought a reduction of the bail and the man's release under house arrest, as he believed that Randy was actually a victim of his wife's tyranny. The defense attorney insisted that despite the discovery of a large amount of cash in Randy's car, no documents, cards, or other evidence were found indicating that the perpetrator intended to leave the city. The defense argued that his client had had enough time to flee, but he didn't. The prosecution held a different opinion for a long time. There was even a witness who claimed to have heard about plans to flee to Mexico, but this statement later turned out to be false. The mother of the deceased filed a civil lawsuit against her son-in-law because she wanted to prevent him from accessing the financial accounts and assets that he and his wife had acquired together. She feared that Randy would once again evade justice by bribing everyone he could reach with the family's assets. The woman was sure that this was the only way the criminal had previously escaped punishment for his offenses. Rachel's mother hoped that he simply wouldn't be able to bear the court costs and that he would get what he deserved for the heinous act he had committed. Despite everything, time played into the prisoner's hands. The lawyer managed to significantly reduce his bail to $750,000. Randy immediately posted this amount. Since his mother-in-law's lawsuit was still pending, this meant that he would have to wait at least another year and a half for his hearing. The trial was scheduled for September 2014. Surprisingly, the judge even allowed Randy to continue living in the house where the murder of his wife had been committed. However, the man had numerous difficulties to contend with, as the bail conditions still applied, and he was not allowed to leave the house without notifying the Brentwood police at least 24 hours in advance. During this time, he always had to have a lawyer with him and wear a GPS monitoring device in the form of an ankle bracelet. Contact with his daughter and the family members of his murdered wife was prohibited. In the meantime, the mother-in-law continued to fight and awaited a judgment in the civil case. She eventually succeeded in obtaining a restraining order on the couple's property from the court. Nevertheless, Randy simply entered the house and took his belongings and clothes. This came to light, so the man faced a new charge of contempt of court. Thanks to the efforts of his lawyer, however, this charge was dismissed. Such brazenness seemed unthinkable, but it later turned out that the criminal got away with a lot of money thanks to his connections to the governor's club and the city's law enforcement agencies. Investigations revealed that Randy hadn't simply fled into the woods after the murder. Several neighbors said they had discovered on the morning after the massacre that someone had tried to break into their house through garage doors and regular doors. The police officers checked the club's video recordings and found that it was Randy who had tried to break into the neighbor's house. With what exact intentions the man attempted this remains unclear, as he posed a significant danger. He himself denied these facts, and gradually everything was covered up. The judge's decisions, which allowed a dangerous criminal who had lost control of himself to remain at large for a year and a half, were long criticized and rightly questioned. Randy was a true example of how fatal impunity is. He was able to remain at large during the entire period, which he owed to a good lawyer who gave him the opportunity to await his trial. Only months later, in December 2013, he was caught trying to break into a residential complex in another suburb of Nashville called Bellevue. It was a rather bizarre incident reported by one of the residents of the apartment building. According to him, Randy tried to gain access by banging on the door and pretending to be a police officer. The man sensed that something was wrong when he didn't open the door to the uninvited guest, but he heard him doing the same at other apartments, so he called the police. When the police arrived, they found Randy once again heavily intoxicated. The very next day, the judge decided to revoke his bail. Amazingly, the manic alcohol excesses continued both before and after the murder of his wife. One can hardly imagine the fear his neighbors had lived in over the past year, especially when they learned that Randy had been released on bail and was living in the family villa next to them. It seemed that the murderer would soon get what he deserved, as under Tennessee law, his offense carried the death penalty. But his experienced defense attorney had an excellent plan. Unexpectedly, for the victim's family, Randy pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and child neglect on September 29, 2014. As a result, he received only 25 years in prison. Strangely, this is not even half the maximum sentence for this catalog of offenses. The perpetrator could have received 60 years in prison. Furthermore, the murderer's lawyer managed to secure the right to parole, which will be possible under the condition of good behavior by the prisoner. Since he was 42 years old at the time of his sentencing, Randy will have the opportunity to be released at about the age of 60. During the sentencing, Randy said the following words: "Rachel, I promise to love and honor you, and I have betrayed all of that. I will live with this pain forever. No prison is worse than the one I have imposed on myself. To all of Rachel's relatives and friends, I am sincerely sorry that I have caused you so much pain and so many bad moments." The mother of the murdered victim, Betty, regarded this court ruling as a personal insult. She turned several times to higher instances to obtain a review and tightening of the sentence, but all was in vain. Randy himself commented on his lenient sentence as an opportunity to save at least one of Natalie's parents' lives. Naturally, Rachel's family was shocked by such decisions during the investigation and trial. The mother and brother turned to the public through the media to express their discontent about the matter. They also emphasized their grief over the brutal and tragic death of a beautiful, successful woman and expressed their protest by pointing out the absurd decisions of a justice system that seemed to be on the perpetrator's side. Randy was never charged with contempt of court, tampering with evidence, and previous offenses like drunk driving. Randy's lawyer responded to the accusation by conveying his client's sincere regret and condolences to the victim's family. However, Betty heard only platitudes that neither exonerated the perpetrator nor comforted her, nor could bring Rachel back. Natalie was placed in Betty's custody. The child will inherit her parents' entire estate when she comes of age. The victim's mother is still convinced that the only reason for her son-in-law's lenient sentence is his connections and his money. Thank you for watching, and take care of yourselves.